because I look at ourselves today, we're dealing with the Metcalfes right now. So what do we do?
Yeah.
How do we work together? How do we engage? How do we deal with these so-called Metcalfe kind of characters?
Yeah.
And I don't think there's an easy answer, but I do know this, unless we start to think about engaging it, we're never going to find the right answer. But I think issues can be solved in a native way, alternative way, a way that we see as being a lot more human or a relational way. So I think that's a big critical element, and that bleeds into everything else that we do.
Welina mai. Welcome to our talk story session, ʻāina, Chief of War. ʻāina means to uncover the hidden meaning and expose what lies beneath the surface. I'm Pa'akai Sibbett, the co-creator, executive producer, and head writer of the Apple TV Plus series Chief of War. And I'm also the host of this show. This session shares the insights of educator and cultural practitioner Kaleikoa Kā. We explore the shift when Hawaiian traditions intersected with Western colonial expansion. Our conversation considers how the history depicted in this episode continues to reverberate even through today. Aloha mai, welcome back. We're going to be talking all things episode 7. This episode has some heavy stuff in it, and so it's something I think that we really should be discussing. But before we get into that, we'll just kind of breeze over the episode. Yeah. So in the beginning, we opened with just a community piece. We wanted to cover something that felt like after the events of episode 6, where Keoua starts to burn the storage huts of the storage of food and all of that, like he's starting to antagonize and cause conflict. We wanted to show, what it is that what they're fighting for, the sense of community and all of that. We originally, funny enough, we actually wanted to originally film this in Kahana Bay, and we were going to do it like a hukilau or something. But we weren't able to pull that off. So we found this scene, and we thought the birth of a child would be a nice thing. Also a reminder for Ka'ahumanu, right? Because her character is struggling, right? And not having this, able to bear children. One thing that was fun in this episode is the chanter in the beginning of the episode. There's somebody who's kind of doing a melodic chant. We found him in Aotearoa, actually. Speaks fluent Hawaiian. He knew Kahidem, and just like he was just a guy in the background one day, And I think Keave and Kaho'okahi were talking, Olowalu, and he came in and just started, talking with them and everything, and everybody just kind of, wow, who is this guy? Like,
and he's there.
Where'd he come from? And we're like, hey, can you chat? Like, we'd love to have you, love to feature you. Another real fun moment in that particular scene is the woman who gives birth to the child. She was actually our head of department for hair and makeup. She was one of the only Pacific Islanders that was at a position like that. And so I told her, I said, you got to be in it, So we had to, we got her all dressed up, and, it was fun. It was fun. The episode starts to get into a little deeper stuff, though. The episode really is about this conflict, right? The interest of the outside world really attaching itself to Hawaii. And so we're introducing Captain Simon Metcalfe's arrival. Like, as far as Simon Metcalfe, like, what is your thought process behind it? What is the...
I think he's really an excellent example, I think, of what many of those so-called traders and merchants, especially sea merchants, were like during that period. As far as I understand, Metcalfe, he got involved very early on with the fur trade and a couple of ships, the Eleanor and the Fair American, and in fact was involved in several, let's say large scale, but he had moved across the world really, transporting and selling, and and as a business person, trader. And so, his coming to Hawaii is a kind of like an offshoot, as I understand it also. He had been up in the Northwest, and the Northwest at that time was a pretty competitive space, I guess, in regards to the various trading interests. You had the Russians who came up from the north, the Mexicans, the Spanish at that time, I should say, coming from the south, and the British and the Americans, and and so Hawaii is kind of this off the beaten path, of course, on its way to Asia, and that becomes that other market. And so, for me, I think what Metcalfe represents is that the interests of the so-called trader or colonizer, or many of the so-called merchants at that time, who their main purpose in life, of course, is to get as much profit as they can at whatever expense that might cost. And I think how he is portrayed in episode 7, I think, is right on the dot in regards to that almost nonchalant kind of supremacist ways in which they see themselves, that everything out there is for the taking. Everything out there can be purchased, can be gained, can be sold, can be traded for. And I think in many ways, their personality is pretty much the same kind of personality I think many of us in Hawaii still deal with today. How do we survive in this kind of world today, especially in a globalized economy today, where you still have different, maybe the investments or the kind of economy or the kind of commodity perhaps may be different that's being sold today, but I think still under the same kind of, a better word like is attack that comes in from the outside, from the West, from the Europeans in many ways during that period, and the Americans who saw Hawaii, who began to see Hawaii, not just as a rest spot, but slowly, as you can see portrayed in your episode, where they're there to find how they can best profit from their stoppage here,
right,
to include that into the trade. And so the callousness, I guess, about that's why I was trying to find that word, that you can find that profit or trade at all costs, even at the expense of human life, is secondary to that kind of investments or that kind of desire for wealth.
Right. So we'll get into the events that happened at the end, but I just remember, even in the research that I was had done and still continue to do, is finding out Metcalfe used this type of strong arming methods everywhere. It was just like you said, it was fairly commonplace for them to try to make a showing of strength and power in order to keep people afraid or worried about what they could do.
And this was going around the world. I mean, so Hawaii, it was just one example, but I mean, if we look through Asia, the Indian coast, African coast, the Americas itself during that period, I mean, you can see that kind of violence that went along with trade, I think, went hand in hand. If we're not going to trade with you fairly, we're going to find perhaps even a violent way to capitalize on what we want to get from you and stuff.
Right. Which, for Waine'e's character, someone who's witnessed this, been a part of this kind of trade and commerce, I just felt like it was a strong position, because you're right, there can be a fair way to do the trade. It doesn't necessarily mean it goes off without a hitch or that people don't get hurt, but there is a version where Hawaii could take control of the trade. But the problem is the trade won't happen whether you want it to or not. And somebody like Waine'e is saying that's the way it goes. So either we take control of it or we lose control of everything. And positioning her with that, I think was necessary. And because we have the luxury of knowing what happened, and eventually Hawaii did gain control over some of the things they traded in sandalwood and whaling and all of that, and how it did in a lot of ways benefit, that they weren't fully being taken advantage of. They had some control over it for a while, but then inevitably you have something that people want, they'll find a way to get it. And so Metcalfe's story introduces us to that.
Yeah, and Metcalfe, I mean, like you said, he had a reputation as, and again, not just Metcalfe, but I think those so-called traders in general. The famous story of Metcalfe whipping supposedly the back of Kamehameha. If you look at the royal crest, of course, the Hawaiian Kingdom crest, you get Kamanava and Kamehameha, the royal twins, the royal Kekaliki twins. And Kamanava is the one with the spear, and Kamehameha is the one with the kaili. But they're so entrenched in our histories that they represent our or so-called seal of the Hawaiian kingdom. But, as the story goes, Metcalfe had unfortunately whipped supposedly the back of Kamehameha, who was a very high-ranking Ali'an chief, total sign of disrespect. And of course, then later on comes to haunt them in their own history with the death of his own son, also Thomas, I think his name was Metcalfe. But I think, to me, I think that episode really showcases that this, I think even the characters, of course, between Kamehameha and Kaiana, where, because Kaiana has seen with his own eyes and experienced that world of trade, especially in Asia, he sees the kind of cutthroat, profit at all costs kind of worldview. So he knows that, Kamehameha perhaps, who sees the world in a very different way as maybe, I'm not saying more fair and honest trader, but someone that sees humanity in a way of, let's go find a good deal for both of us, is very different in regards to a person like Metcalfe, which is just trying to find as much profit as he get at any cost as he can get. And so I think that's a very important clash of those two ideas that you've portrayed very well with those two, with Kamehameha and Kaiana, to show that they're both correct. They're both analyzing the world and how they know the world. And their motivation, in fact, is really to protect our people at the best they can in the best way that they knew. I mean, Kaiana could have just been a trader himself and saw the world as something he could profit for his own self to better his own life. But because in our structure, in our family structure, Kaiana also still had responsibilities to the family and the community. I think that kept him from pursuing those kinds of self-interest and instead seeing that, in many ways, his role was to help protect as best as he could Hawaii from those kinds of foreign interests that may be more violent or more greedy than that we had experienced previous to that.
Right. No, I'm glad that you pointed that out, because it really is both of those perspectives you're talking about, Kaiana, Kamehameha, they're justifiable, and technically they're both right.
Correct. Yeah.
And it is a matter of figuring out how do you navigate this. And, again, because we know where history led us, then we were able to position Kaiana as the one that does know what's going to happen. And he happens to know Captain Simon Metcalfe and, what he's all about and the things that they witnessed in Zamboanga in early episodes, just knowing that kind of mannerisms are alive and they're out there. Not everybody has it. That's one thing that I did want to paint the picture with this show, is that not everybody that's foreigner is bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And not everybody that's Hawaiian is good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We have to be realistic about how we're portraying these things, But yeah, I mean, getting us into this position, I wanted to talk a little bit about, the arrival of Metcalfe. He comes, And actually, if I could do a quick little sidebar, this is a story that you may not have heard. Yeah. I talk a little bit about Ho'ailona, things that we have seen that helped us along the way, knowing that we're on the right path. So our move to Aotearoa was a strategic decision, not just on the finances side, but it needed to be a culturally appropriate move. And we were trying to uphold culture in everything that we did in production. So we would, every location we shot, we would meet with the ʻīmea of the area and have a cultural exchange. I found out in one particular area we hadn't honored our side of an agreement with the tribes, and I didn't realize that until we needed to go back to that location, and they didn't really want us to be there. And we were like, "What happened? What's going on?" And we realized there was a misstep in our communication, and wanting to make sure that we were doing things correctly. Then we decided, and when I say we, the production, myself and Cliff Curtis, who was a co-producer of ours, we went and met with them, just us two, to just open arms and full hearts, what happened? What can we do to make this right? And what happened was really interesting. We were able to kind of make pono, the things the misunderstandings, the things that went wrong. And the iwi of that area became an advocate for us to about 12 different tribes in the area to like become like champions for us to be able to continue to work in that area. So we ended up having a ceremony protocol to take place where, Hawaii was there representing, and then, our Maori's cousins, and we had this cultural exchange, to kind of bring things back into alignment. The day that we shot Metcalfe coming to the shore was this location that we fought for. And we had, like a sunrise ceremony, and had the opening, had the karakia, and before we turned the cameras on, right before we turned them on, there was an orca that popped up right in the shallows, not like far out there. It was right in the shallow. And so everybody's like, wow, we gather up to the shore, we see that the 1 turns to 2, the 2 turns to 4, 5, just swimming in that area, And again, this was right after we had made things pono, And so whether that's one of those coincidences that people can say, wow, that was beautiful, that was wonderful, that was really cool that we got to witness that, or whether you can see that, as many of us do, as a Hawai Lona, that we have come back into alignment. We are good on not only the production side, but on the cultural and spiritual side, that we are back in alignment.
But I think exactly what you shared is a real important element of not just making a so-called Pacific movie,
right,
but doing a movie in a Pacific way. See, I think that's the piece that many perhaps people may not understand. That, I mean, you guys could have easily just, throw some money and perhaps pay them off too, but that's not what's going to make things pono in a way. That's exactly what you're saying. And I think that's the piece where, it's not just about making a movie about a Polynesian movie, but trying to make a movie in our best Hawaiian way that we can, or in a Pacific way we can. And so part of that is to make sure at all times that our so-called the tangata whenua, the hosts of that land, are always consulted and incorporated. Because I think that's just a natural part of our culture, is that when you're in somebody else's home, the first thing is to acknowledge that it is their home and that we act and behave in their home in that manner. So I think that's one important critical element. I think that, as you just shared, I think is really, really important to understand in the making of this film, is also, as you said, is to take that step to be proactive in trying to harness that mana in a way. To me, it's harnessing that mana. So because this is just the first step in many other steps that will come into the future. So if the first step is not done in the right way, which is a very Polynesian way, we have to, and upon we have to strengthen it up. We have to fix it, because our relations really is what's most important. And I think to me, I think that's such a critical element, which allows us to, think about what the future may be in regards to Pacific filmmaking or storytelling. So,
well, and if we don't do this the correct way, then we leave that reputation behind, right? So then it turns into, this lineage connection that we have with Aotearoa. It starts to turn into a conversation about, the Hawaiians never, they never come correct. They never do what they're supposed to do. And so it was important for us. And the truth is this was an active conversation between Jason and I. And I've mentioned this before, but how could we lead this production with culture? It's not done that way, But in reality, I feel like productions can go into spaces respectfully, understanding who the hosts of those locations are. And we would hope that not just for future productions in Hawaii, but just in general, when you go into places that we have this type of interaction, this type of communication. And then it really came down to, how could we ever ask somebody to do it if we cannot do it? How can we ask someone to respect our place, to respect, our practices and our belief systems if we cannot even do it?
And it bleeds into other things. I mean, how do we do business as people? I mean, Metcalfe represents a particular way of how people do business.
Right.
What is the Pacific way of what is the Pacific way of education? What is the Pacific way of healing? I mean, I think this bleeds into all these different kinds of arenas in which, as Pacific peoples, we start to become more subjective or take control of our own voices. I think we're going to start to recover more of these ways of doing things that are in other words, it's not only one way to skin a cat, as there's other ways. And part of us is rediscover, and I think that's the point. there's no shame in rediscovering. See, I think because we understand, specifically, I think we understand there's the mana is still in there. It has, that ember never burnt out. You know, that ember is there, just needs a little blowing of wind and air, and it's kind of going to reignite and stuff. And so, and to me, the only way it starts is by doing it itself. And so, you know, even going to your point about the fact that many of the episodes had to be, or the shooting eventually, a lot of it ended up in Aotearoa. And so on one hand, you know, in a kind of dialectical sense, you know, it's a big negative. But on the opposite end, you know, it was an opportunity to reconnect really with our Pacific peoples.
Yeah.
Because we're a lot more stronger together than we are separate.
Well, we also knew if we had to move, because it really wasn't a conversation of, you know, well, let's stay in Hawaii or let's go. It was never a conversation of, you know, we could stay. So then it was like, well, how do we salvage, you know, what we're losing, you know? And it really came down to this notion of, well, we can use production as an excuse to reconnect lineage lines. Yeah. And, you know, they took it just as seriously as we did, which I loved, you know. There was wonderful, wonderful moments of that, you know.
Yeah.
I had an experience where I was, before we were filming, I'm back there with a handful of the Polynesian guys, and but they're wearing our costumes. Yeah. They're wearing our, you know, regalia. And I just, out of curiosity, just said, hey, how you guys feel about wearing this kind of stuff? You know what I mean? Like, what does this mean to you? And one of them told me, he literally told me, he says, I know I felt something, but I didn't know what, so I had to go to the beach to see if the ancestors were present. And he said, and I felt them. They're here. And I was like, you can't pay for that. You know, I like, as much as I love some of these other cultures, like, you know, we could have gone to Thailand and captured some of the visuals that we needed. And they have a beautiful culture, but it's not the same.
The same, yeah.
Like, I wouldn't have been able to pay anyone in Thailand to have that same feeling that they were feeling over there, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's why, I mean, like, I do know, I would love, you know, as the show moves forward, that we do provide more here. The people here are good enough. You know, the crews are awesome.
Yeah.
We can do it. We just have to be able, there needs to be, you know, the return and what is supported here. And we're working on that. We want to do more work here. We want to do more projects here. But yeah, that it was a bit of a struggle. But
and the other thing with the character of Metcalfe, I thought was really important. And I just trying to, you know, watching that episode, it just brought to mind many of those other so-called Metcalfes that we've all met in our lives.
Yeah.
You know, in the same way, maybe different fields, maybe they're not, you know, ship traders, but, you know, they're out there, the same kind of callous brutality of what they want is all that matters, you know, at whatever cost it might take. And so, you know, another important piece of this episode, I think, especially for young Hawaiians, to think about the same questions that are being investigated in that episode, or being asked or being taught about the various characters, whether it's Kamehameha or it's ʻāina or the women in the film. These are the same questions that we're dealing with today.
Yeah.
You know, how do we work together? How do we engage? How do we deal with these so-called Metcalfe kind of characters? And I think, to me, I think that's the most important. So when you look at history or this retelling of a drama, you know, kind of send a history sense, so it's really about, find the ways we can take that kind of questions that are being asked in that episode and think about them today. You know, because I look at ourselves today, we're no different than the ʻāinas and Kamehamehas today.
Right.
You know, that's us right now today. We're dealing with the Metcalfes right now. So what do we do?
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think there's an easy answer, but I do know this, unless we start to think about engaging it, you know, we're never going to find the right answer. But I think part of the answer, and I think a major piece of the answer, exactly what you just explained in regards to that model of, you know, things don't have to be solved in a Hollywood fashion. You know, issues can be solved in a native way, alternative way, a way that we see as being a lot more human or a relational way. So I think that's a big critical element, and that bleeds into everything else that we do with each other today, perhaps, you know.
Well, I mean, look, the fact that you're making that parallel is great, because even as far as production is concerned,
Hollywood has a bad reputation in some places, right? Like technically in Hawaii, there's a lot of people that don't appreciate when they come in and, because like you said, the solution is usually money. Like we'll just throw money at it and people will be okay with us, walking over sacred sites or, like not really catering to what the community needs. Like we're giving them money, it's okay. And yeah, that is a thing, and that is something that we try to be cognizant of. And, it does take a little more time, but only because those protocols aren't in place.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's harder to be culturally appropriate, other than it's not part of the everyday production budget. It's not part of what we normally do. But when we put those in place and we start to move in that direction, it also helps us in so many other ways,
Yeah.
And like you said, is trying to stay pono and move forward. But yeah, no, I think this episode does beg a lot of questions. I mean, one of them, for example, is the way that we're positioning it. I wanted it to feel like an open-ended question. But did he do that because of Kaiana?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that moment, just to make sure that this isn't, fully fabricated to help push the story, this happened. Kaiana did, talk to Kamehameha like, look, man, I don't think we should let this guy go. I mean, we got to take care of this. And Kamehameha said, no. Kaiana said, okay, and went out and, tried to kill Metcalfe and the crew. Like he really did try to do that. Kamehameha arriving, that happened. They argued in Hawaiian on the boat. I'm trying to think of it from Metcalfe's point of view. It's like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
He has no idea what's going on, but clearly, there's something's not right. You know what I mean? And one area, and I was a little unsure of how to present this, because we know, and this is what we can talk about, is that it inevitably leads to Metcalfe leaving, and he actually ends up in Olowalu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, I didn't specify specifically Olowalu in the show.
Yeah.
Because obviously I wanted Kaiana to see the impact of what happened, as opposed to hearing about it, right? So that's the one part that wasn't historically accurate. I never alluded where it happened necessarily, but we're just saying it happened in this other harbor, right? But it's Olowalu. Can we talk about Olowalu for a minute?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't realize, I've heard conversations in the past, compared to other Native peoples, we've never had these kinds of violence or that. But the truth is perhaps not at a scale like American Indians in regards to the kind of massacres. But they have happened here. An example, of course, in Olowalu, where, Captain Metcalfe, who had come, he had ended up in Hawaii first headed to Kaleikoa, if I remember right, and then he was up in Honolulu on the south side of Maui, and trading, trying to gain items for him to trade with the so-called natives, the Hawaiians in that area, and it's there that in fact the first real interaction of violence also occurs, where he supposedly also whips someone, and again you can see having that kind of energy, where you're trading, but it's really about, I'm going to get from you, and even if I have to beat you down like an animal, it's already ingrained in the mentality. And so, it's there supposedly where one of the so-called, I guess, what do you call it, skiff or a little boat inside in the back, supposedly stolen away at night and is burnt. If I remember that name, I remember the name of the ali'i. Kaupuiki, in fact, was his name. Kaupuiki was the ali'i of that area who, in fact, was getting married to Kalola, or had some kind of relationship with Kalola. Anyway, he leads a party, and he wanted to trade with Metcalfe. Metcalfe guys were kind of being cold, I guess, about trade. So eventually what happens is they steal the boat, and they burn the boat to get the nails that they wanted, that metal.
Yeah.
And this leads Metcalfe into a rage, how dare that they would, quote unquote, steal his boat. And I guess a sailor also lost his life in that skirmish. And so what does Metcalfe do is that when they end up in Olowalu, which is towards the west side of Maui, towards Lahaina or Lele, at that end of Maui, there was Kalola was out there. In fact, they had the the couple was set, the Ma'umai couple, for 3 days. No one was supposed to go out and trade with Metcalfe folks. But anyway, Metcalfe folks are in this rage, and they prepare. And, you know, sadly what happens after 3 days, the people from Olowalu go out to trade, and I think people came from all over, in fact, Lanai and other islands all came, and they kind of guided them to come right in front of the side of the ship. So they got them all on one side of the ship. And just like that scene, I mean, the whole mentality was just to obliterate. And he said over 100 people lost their lives. Countless others were injured and hurt. But just that kind of gore of violence just showcases this is who Metcalfe actually is. You know, is this supposed human being who is willing to just punish over 100 deaths are taken over a ship. And so I think that's so that one scene that's portrayed in 7, you know, I think where they load up the nails and there, you can just see that mass death that occurs. I think for me, it also portrays, this is the kind of violence that many so-called native and indigenous people, Aboriginal peoples around the world have shared those kind of experience of violence, especially with trying to interact with the so-called European colonizer or settler or trader. And so although this is specifically, you know, one event in Hawaii, I think something's going to resonate when many people, I mean, even to this day, what we see happening in the world to this day, I think, you know, you can see that same kind of violence upon native peoples that is almost normalized in that business world.
Yeah.
You know.
It was a really tough scene to, I mean, first and foremost, it was tough to write it. You know what I mean? Like, just the impact, knowing what's going to happen, was hard to write, was really hard to shoot. And the truth is we toned it down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it was quite bad.
Yeah.
You know, and some accounts, because of the injuries you'd mentioned, like clean 100 dead, between 200 and 300 died actually from the injuries and because they loaded grape shots, which is like the cannon's version of a shotgun, right? Like, put nails inside the canister, shoot that thing, and just let it go. And very, very.
And you know, and our people were just, you know, innocent people just trying to trade the best they could. In a way, I think that's what Kamehameha represents. Also, seeing that in this scene here, you know, they see as trade as being this maybe more honorable kind of sense of human to human, and Metcalfe represents what Kaiana already sees as being you know, their world of trade is to basically exploit and take as much as can, including human cargo. I think it was in the scene 7 that shows that anything is for sale, anything can be bought, even human life can be taken for profit.
Yeah. I mean, we do know that, you know, John Young was actually on that ship, which is one of the historical inaccuracies that we did, but he was marooned on the island, and I did want to show that progression for that character. So we just dropped him.
Which is interesting too. Those two most important so-called Haole advisors of Kamehameha, you know, both come out of that Metcalfe.
Yeah.
You know, one from the Eleanor, one from the Fair American. But it's interesting how they, you know, at one hand they both come from one of the most violent scenes ever in Hawaii, yet they become one of the most trusted advisors under Kamehameha. Really helped solidify Kamehameha's powerful rise and reign, you know, especially even the cannon, if I remember right, I think Lopaka actually comes from Metcalfe itself, and that cannon eventually will become the cannon that's used even in Kipaniwai, the Battle of Maui. Maui loses his sovereignty to Kamehameha. So it's like an interesting role that Metcalfe plays in all of this, not just him personally, but all of those on those early ships that arrived with him.
Well, I do remember even when I read that, wait, what? Like, Kaiana went on the ship, you know, and then I was like, so how could, it just felt like, man, you know, for Kaiana's character, and, you know, and Jason, really, man, this is the role for him. He really comes out solid in this series. But, you know, to be this man that is trying so hard to prevent, you know, catastrophes and all of that. But then, you know, when he does something like that, and then, you know, Olowalu is the result. I mean, God, like, it's such a that would be so difficult. And how do you place blame? You know, because is it Kamehameha's fault? Is it Kaiana's fault? You know what I mean? That's the question that we lead into in the following episodes, right? So it's this episode was a lot. I mean, it was a lot. It's character based, but it's all based on real events. And you know, Olowalu, like you said, it's our wounded knee. You know, it
is, and I think that's the part also is that, you know, is that it's important that we tell that story, in especially Olowalu, so you know that people understand that there is a history in Hawaii of even including violence. You know, that in fact will come into the Hawaiian Kingdom era later on. But you know, for me again, that whole question of we trying to navigate, you know, we as Native people, as Kanaka, trying to navigate this world in this Kanaka worldview and how we see human to human, you know, and we cannot be naive in this world either, because in today's world, we're the Kaiana and the Kamehameha in many ways. You know, we live in this world where we kind of see each other in our cultural worldview of human to human, and then yet at the same time, like Kaiana, we've experienced enough of the world to know that the world can be a very dangerous place for Native peoples and stuff also. And so, you know, in a way, I think that's what came into my mind when I saw those two, that interesting moment where they're confronting each other with what to do, and thinking to myself, that's us. Yeah. That's us today. Yeah. You know, in that same way, we are Kamehameha, and in the same sense, we are Kaiana.
That was better than I could have said it. No, I mean, really, that's great. Just to backtrack a quick second, when we were talking about Metcalfe's motives, the one thing that just gets me is he had a beef, you know, in a particular area, but decided to leave and enter into an area where nobody has any idea, like, just what he was planning on doing, why he was planning on doing it. It's just, I don't know, that kind of destructive.
This is just this cruelty and callousness that, but to me, that's the ultimate showcase of how a person like Metcalfe, representing that world at that time, perhaps saw most Native peoples around the world. You know, that if punishment need be, and if I need to teach these people a good lesson in fear. I mean, that goes back to Columbus and the whole, you know, the Kakis and so forth, in the coming of so-called Columbus and the Taino and Arawak people. Same kind of mentality that, you know, in the end, you know, there's this justified violence that can be put on Native peoples if it's about trade and profit.
Yeah. I will say, without going too much further into the history after this point, because those are things that we want to discuss and discover in future storytellings of Kaiana. I did remember feeling very upset that there wasn't a catharsis that takes place for the crimes that Metcalfe had committed. And the closest thing to it is just knowing that, you know, he fled and ended up in the Nootka Sound. And whatever he did up there, whoever he pissed off or whatever, the natives up there killed him. And I'm not, you know, I don't wish death upon anyone, but I just remember thinking, that was the closest thing to karma for Hawaii, even though it didn't happen in Hawaii. Because part of me just in the stories was just wishing, hoping that Hawaii at least was able to get their, you know, redemption for what happened. And
there's something else in the scene I remember that kind of stuck out of me was when they were firing on the beach. That in the acting, what I witnessed was you could see it wasn't as if, again, it wasn't if all of them that's what they wanted to do. You could see in their faces that many of them were shocked or else didn't want to do what occurred. But, you know, it's like that structure, right? Yeah. The man says, captain says, it's going to happen anyway and stuff. And so I thought that was an interesting kind of tension also, because it shows that, again, it's not all of them are perhaps bad, but yet at the same sense, why didn't any of them actually prevent it from happening? And perhaps that power structure doesn't allow it. Right. You know, but I just thought it was an interesting tension about humanity. That it's not all bad. It's not all good.
A lot of times we willingly participate in, things.
And this is our world today too, that we can see occurring. Yeah.
We are 100%. Yeah. We see that on a countrywide level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. In Kaleikoa, I really appreciate this conversation. This is one that I've really been wanting to have. This conversation is one I've really been wanting to have. And, obviously your position, being Maui, an educator.
You got to give the full Maui story.
No, but there'll be more. We'll have more.
But I just want to say thank you. And like I said, when I watched that episode 7 for me specifically, it really resonated in regards to, if I would ask our people when watching that episodes to think about how does it relate to us today? Who are we today? How would we deal with that question back then? And more importantly, how do we deal with that question today?
Yeah.
And perhaps even more important, how do we teach our future generation to deal with those same kind of questions that they're going to have to deal with in the future?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mahalo for being here.
Thank you, brother.
Aloha.
Aloha nui.
Mahalo nui to our viewers and listeners for joining us as we dug deeper into the brilliance and burdens of Hawaii's chiefs beyond what was experienced in the Chief of War show. I'm Pa'akai Sibbett. Until next time, aloha.